Tietokoneilluusiot tekevät näkyväksi sen, mitä ei voi nähdä, ja mahdollistavat mahdottoman.
In charge of the sun, the wind, and the stars.
Given enough time, anything is possible. I really can't imagine anything that can't be done in the computer.
Koskaan aiemmin ei taidemuoto ole vaikuttanut populaarikulttuuriin ja merkittävään elinkeinoon yhtä voimakkaasti kuin tietokoneanimaatio elokuvaan ja televisioviihteeseen.
On your seat, because we're just going to be creating some absolutely incredible imagery, and people are going to be blown away.
Tietokoneanimaatio on avannut ovet uuteen viihteen universumiin. Tietokoneanimaatio ei kuulunut sanastoomme vielä 1960-luvun alussa, kun Evan Sutherland kehitti ensimmäisen interaktiivisen tietokonegrafiikkajärjestelmän. 1970-luvulle tultaessa kokeiltiin jo liikkuvaa kolmiulotteista animaatiota. Tohtori James Blinn oli uuden taidemuodon pioneereja ja tutkija, joka vastasi monista käänteentekevistä innovaatioista. Blinn toi työhönsä taiteilijan näkökulman.
I was always interested in math and physics. My parents, however, were artists, and when I went to school and first discovered computers, fairly early on I discovered that computers could be used to make pictures, and this just seemed like the obvious thing to do.
Pioneerityöllään Blinn nopeutti tietokoneanimaation kehitystä ratkaisevasti. Hän paransi tietokonegrafiikkaa niin teknisesti kuin laadullisestikin. Vektorigraafisesta kehikosta alkavalla klassisella kuvasarjallaan Blinn havainnollisti tietokonegrafiikan kehitystä. Näemme, miten malja rakentuu monikulmioista ja peittyy Blinnin kehittämällä realistista pintaa simuloivalla pintakuvioinnilla. Ensimmäisiä tietokoneanimoituja ihmishahmoja oli Blobby Man, jolla James Blinn esitteli uutta pinnankuvausteekniikkaansa. Noina varhaisvuosina, kun Blinn ja joukko tutkijoita ja taiteilijoita ottivat ensiaskeleitaan tässä uudessa digitaalisessa maailmassa, Yhdysvaltain puolustusministeriö hyödynsi ensimmäisenä tietokonegrafiikkaa sotilassimulaattoreissa. '80-luvulla tietokoneet ja ohjelmat kehittyivät nopeasti. Inhimillisen liikkeen toisintaminen oli kuitenkin yhä suuri haaste. Kuulussa Brilliance-mainoksessaan tietokoneanimaation pioneeri Robert Abel ratkaisi ongelman kehittämällään brute force-tekniikalla.
We filmed a live model and programmed her choreographed movements into the computer. The computer tracked reference points painted on her body and created a stick figure animation, which we call a vector graphic.
Vektorigraafinen hahmo luotiin tietokoneella. Ihmisen liikkeitä seuraten animaattorit saivat tietokonehahmon liikkumaan sulavasti. Abelin tekniikka on nykyisten liikkeen seurantajärjestelmien edeltäjä.
You know, I was like most kids. School days, my parents could not get me out of bed. But on Saturday morning, when the cartoons were on, 6 a.m., bowl of cereal, front of the TV, I was there all day until the golf matches came on. I loved cartoons.
Oscarilla palkittu ohjaaja John Lasseter oivalsi jo varhain tietokoneanimaation mahdollisuudet. Hän aloitti uransa perinteisenä animaattorina Disneyn studioilla.
From Disney, I went up and followed my interest in computer animation up to Lucasfilm, where they had, in the early 80s, the best computer animation research group in the entire world. In 1984, we did a short film, The Adventures of Andre and Walibi, where I designed the characters and did the story and created the animation. It's very interesting because when that premiered, I had a lot of questions afterwards. people saying, "What kind of software did you use? What was it?" I mean, it made those characters really move like that. And I was like, well, it's keyframe animation. It's pretty much what everybody else used. No, 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 no. The characters were like really alive. You know, what software did you use? It dawned on me, really, after I did The Adventures of Andre and Walibi, that the computer animation, it was a science that was growing into an art form. And most of the people that were doing the imagery with computers were people who were creating the tools as well. And so it's like imagining a world where all the paintings were created by the chemists who mixed up the paint. These people really didn't have the understanding of the art of animation, the basic principles of animation. About that time, the group at Lucasfilm spun off and formed the separate company called Pixar. February of 1986. And that same year, we said, you know, let's do a new short film, something that we can say, this is Pixar. So the simplicity required by the lack of computer power, Bill Reeves, my technical director partner, said, "You can't have any background, John." So I just had it fade off into black. No camera moves. All right, we'll lock the camera down. All these things came together and focused everybody on just the characters. I understand that the computer was just a tool. It wasn't going to do anything for me. It's not computer-generated animation. It's animators using the computer to create the animation. After that, we had started developing ideas, Bill and I, on trying to do sort of dark, moody images with the computer. And so Bill had done these beautiful images like a city at night in the rain. And when I came in and saw it, it was so moody. And also I had this story that I was developing about an inept clown. The star, the guy who was really good, was his unicycle that was alive. I saw this and immediately got the idea to take and use this to bookend this clown story. And out of the moodiness of the image, I decided, you know, what I want to do with this is to make a sad ending. And the challenge for Red's Dream was to deal with a sad ending. It was trying to get the pathos, that feeling, that heart. Everybody at Pixar was like, no, 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 don't do it. Don't do a sad ending. Make it happy. Make the clown come in and buy him or something like that. And I was like, no, 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 no. Let's make it sad. Let's go with this. The idea for Tin Toy really came from when Bill Reeves had his first daughter, and we really wanted to do a baby. And my sister had had a baby boy, and she had taken some really great home video. And that was where she sat down, she filmed her son, my nephew, for about a half an hour straight. She just surrounded him with his favorite toys and just filmed him. It was so much fun, and I started looking at this and saw how he just would slobber on these toys. And I thought, oh boy, wouldn't it be horrible to be a toy? And it was like... No one really had been able to do a human before, and it was a really big technical challenge. One of the challenges was to keep it sort of cartoony yet human, and and we had the diaper on, but it looks more like a cast. It's very hard to do organic shapes and things with a computer, and that baby was just all organic, and so it was a really, but it's interesting, there's a lot of things that we worked and developed to do that baby in Tin Toy that was the foundation for all the work that we did in Toy Story. Tin Toy really was a challenge, both artistically, because it was the longest film we had done. It was the first human we did, and it was using new modeling and animation software and rendering software. So it was a big challenge, but it was really exciting when it won the Oscar, because it's the very first computer animated short film, ever to win an Academy Award.
Tietokoneanimaatio kehittyy jatkuvasti. Tietokonevalmistajat ja ohjelman kehittäjät ponnistelevat saadakseen tuotteistaan nopeampia, parempia ja edullisempia. Tämä on mahdollistanut animoitujen efektien räjähdysmäisen lisäyksen TV-sarjatuotannossa. Aamupiirretyistä aina tieteissarjoihin tietokonegrafiikka muuttaa televisioilmaisua.
It was literally just a few years ago where special effects were models. When you thought of special effects, that's what you were dealing with, was a model.
Computers in those days were attached to cameras, and we'd stick some 35mm film in the camera, we'd put a model out on a stage, put a blue screen behind it. What the computer did was move the camera. Within the last few years, that's changed completely. Now the computer is generating the imagery. There is no camera.
As an effects supervisor, I have to deal with two issues. Well, what would it really be like? And the other one would be, well, what looks good on film? That's a big difference in terms of the two universes. We'll quite frequently try to design something as specifically real as we can. For example, the Voyager is actually built to scale as if it would exist. It's huge in the computer, so that we know that if we build everything else around it to scale, that they'll have direct relationships between them. We can fit a shuttle in the shuttle bay because the shuttle is actually built the size it would really be, and so is a Voyager, so it goes right in. And we know that there's that direct relationship. Style can be a very arbitrary thing in this business, in that it depends on what you're producing and how much style you can infuse in it. Tim McHugh, when he started Space, he said, you know, I really want to get a dark, kind of almost black and white feel going, so it feels really gritty. And I thought, well, that's a really dramatic approach. Well, when it comes to Voyager, they've been doing that for years, and they already have a way they want it to look. Our goal with that was trying to make sure we match those models that they have as exactly as we possibly could. And that's really the whole amount of style we were able to put in initially. Now, as we get going a little bit more further and they're starting to trust CGI, we're able to say, you know what? Rather than just have the ship float by like you usually do, because that's all motion control could do, why don't we have a tumble or have the camera come swooping underneath, things they weren't able to do before, so that's why they weren't in the show, but now we can sort of infuse our sense of style into those shows.
There's a real nice collaboration in different companies using different software packages, different ways of working. They can do what they're best at, and they can provide, you know, we can provide the Voyager ship element, Santa Barbara can provide the backgrounds.
There's a certain realism that you have to go for, and yet most of the imagery that you're generating is pure fantasy. That is one of the nice challenges, certainly with Star Trek, where I did the first 2 shots from the Voyager titles. Paramount gave us the freedom to design our own effects that we wanted to always do. They said, we like what you guys have done in the past, so we wanted something like the solar flare, and we like the Saturn rings you've done before, and we want to put the Voyager ship in there.
Uudet menetelmät on otettu nopeasti käyttöön. Animaattori Mark Wendell käyttää luonnollisten prosessien kuvaamiseen kehitettyjä hiukkasanimaatiomenetelmiä luodessaan tieteisklassikkoon huikeita näkymiä.
One of the things that 2 of us came up with the idea for was to show the ship actually interacting with this environment, where it was leaving behind some kind of a turbulent wake. And so I went into Dynamation and I laid out this grid of particles which were rendered as soft, puffy little bits of gas, and move the Voyager ship through that field. I'd put a repulsive field right at the head of the ship so that cleared the bow wave, and then off the side of the ship I would have vortex fields swirling these gases into the rear of the ship, and then a couple fields that acted like jets off the back of the engines, and those acting in concert generated these turbulent fields.
Okay, Lieutenant, you've got one more chance to keep us from being nuked.
Tehokkaammat suorittimet ja paremmat peliohjaimet ovat mahdollistaneet yhä realistisemmat tietokonepelit. Raja filmianimaation ja pelinäkymien välillä on nopeasti katoamassa.
One form of computer graphics that's very unique to the computer game industry is the whole concept of real-time graphics, of real-time games, games that need to redraw themselves at runtime. A game like Zork Nemesis gets completely pre-rendered. Things don't change in real time. When you play a real-time game, you're controlling everything on the screen in real time. The characters are built in polygons that redraw themselves every few seconds. You're pushing buttons and you're getting an immediate response.
If you press jump, he should immediately jump. If there's a little bit of a lag, the player will claim it doesn't feel right. There's only a certain amount of RAM you can take up. There's not an infinite amount of RAM in the world. We're challenged to create an exciting experience, an engaging experience within certain parameters.
Here we go! The skill sets for creating these computer graphics are an entirely new phenomenon. Because you have to build these graphics within a very specific polygon budget, the number of polygons that the computer can draw. It forces us to take a character and say, how do we create a human with 70 polygons? Artists who can create wonderful images in 4-bit or 8-bit constraints are worth their weight in gold, because often we have to work within those constraints. We're training people internally in designing characters and environments that you can build in low polygon environments for games that you play in real time. So that's a whole new form of computer graphics that have emerged unique to the gaming industry.
First and foremost, graphics has taken off. It used to be that you could just start a video game up, a little creature would crawl across the screen, and that would start the game. Now it seems the ante is 1.5 to 2 minute fully animated, almost feature film quality opening.
Elokuvassa Fifth Element, puuttuva tekijä, hyödynnettiin tietokonegrafiikkaa, kun valkokankaalle luotiin tyylitelty tulevaisuuden Manhattan.
We had about 225 shots in Fifth Element, and every shot was a composite of some nature, so that we had some physical effects and some digital effects. In some of the shots, it was just plain too difficult to do in miniature. For instance, in the cab chase, 90% of the traffic in the movie is all digital. Because of the framing style of the movie, each shot required digital extension of the miniature cityscape. Some of our work was almost entirely digital, like the reconstruction of Lilu. The robotic arms, the body parts as they're being constructed were all digital. At that time, the Visible Human Database Project was making headlines. A convicted murderer donated his body to science and understood that the use of his body was going to create a database of the human body inside and out. After he was killed by lethal injection, his body was frozen into blocks of gelatin, which were then put onto a surface planer, and 1 millimeter at a time his body was photographed in plan view and then planed off 1 millimeter, and then the next one photographed all the way through his body, so that you have a very concise and registerable stack of section views through the human body, and it revolutionized revolutionized the ability of science to see within the human body, see the organization of the organs and the skeleton. We introduced our director, Luc Besson, to that idea, and he took off on that right away and thought that if we had a machine that sort of doled out slices of a human that corresponded to the slices of data from the Visible Human Database Project, that would be a really cool way to stack up a reconstructed body. We used that data most directly in our shot of the stacking of Lilu's skull, so that as the machine is working quickly, we have two dispensing machines on either side of frame from which the sort of pick-and-place robots are grabbing slices and stacking them and fusing them onto her skull.
Tutkijat ovat olleet tietokoneanimaation suurimpia käyttäjiä. Tieteen tavoitteena on aina ollut tehdä näkyväksi se, mitä ei voi nähdä, ja siihen tietokoneanimaatio tarjoaa suuren joukon näkemistä ja ymmärtämistä helpottavia välineitä. Tiede mallintaa rakenteita ja prosesseja, jotka ovat liian suuria tai pieniä, liian nopeita tai hitaita, liian kaukana avaruudessa tai ajassa, liian rajuja suoraan tutkittaviksi. Kaukaisilta planeetoilta oman kehomme arvoituksiin. Tietokoneanimaatio auttaa tutkijoita muuttamaan teorian ja tiedon joksikin näkyväksi ja ymmärrettäväksi.
In the past, in order to deal with data, scientists would create models, physical models they would hold in their hands, and they would learn about things by in fact, dealing with those models. But now, those three-dimensional models, or even more dimensional models, can be created in the computer and manipulated much more easily and much more versatilely by scientists. Since we don't send out spacecraft in pairs, the only way we can get a view of them operating is with computer animation. We create computer animations and we try to have them done while the event is happening. That becomes the record of the event. And it gives us a virtual ability to be there with the spacecraft, seeing what it sees and experiencing, if you will, what we would experience were we able to go there with it.
One of the animations that we typically do first as a mission is starting is the trajectory of the spacecraft as it's approaching its target. In this case, you see the trajectory of Galileo as it's approaching the Jovian system, and the yellow line represents Galileo's trajectory, and the other lines represent the moons of Jupiter, which have been exaggerated.
In the last 10 years, there's been an incredible change in computer technology. The kinds of things that used to take a team of dozens of people, weeks, or even months, now we can do in a few days with a few people.
Two kinds of challenges. The first one being time-critical stuff. Generally what I get is, here's the data, we have a press conference tomorrow morning, see what you can do with it. In other words, this has to be on the air tomorrow this time. The second challenge is such as, here is Ganymede, we know the different layers and the core, how it's made up. Find an interesting way of telling the story and visualizing this. We're simulating a volcano on Io. The information provided to me was the gravity of Io, the speed of the particles as they're being ejected, and the cone angle at which they're being ejected. I input those parameters into my animation program, Lightwave, and a plugin for it called Particle Storm. And given those, was able to simulate this volcano here. And the interesting thing about it is, without changing any of the original scientific data that I was given, you notice the particles go up and then they land pretty much on the ring that's surrounding Pele, which confirms the original hypotheses the scientists had about how big it was, how strong the particles were being ejected. I certainly have a number of good friends that are in the entertainment industry, and fortunately the software that I use is the one that's used by most of my friends, so whenever I come up with a technique or a trick, I share it with them and vice versa. I use the particle system to depict a volcano, but the people on Babylon 5 use the exact same particle system to do explosions. The nebulas, they're actually Hubble images that they use unretouched, and it looks quite nice.
We do around about 40 minutes of animation per year for Babylon 5. We treat camera work as if you were a cameraman. A computer effects shot is more than just having nice-looking spaceships in a star field. We try and add that little bit more to it by playing around with composition and camera motion. We don't have the same limitations as a motion control system, so we can fly the camera all around the place. There are no mounting rods on the models, so we can do whatever we want with it. It has been a real problem having any kind of massive effects because they've always been so expensive. So writers won't write them into movies. Now a writer can write just what he wants, and we can usually do it fairly inexpensively. And that, I think, is what's going to be the byproduct of all of this.
We've done well over 1,000 shots for the first season and the pilot. It's been an amazing, literally, we're selling effects by the pound. We have not had to make very many compromises to get this volume of work. With the Star Wars era, in any shot where we want to create multiple elements, we've had to shoot each and every one of those independently, put them all together in some kind of optical printer system, judge your move, maybe go back and change the first move. It was a painstaking process. Now it's automatic. In the virtual world, we create a scenario, we can save it, and we can move around in it. We can put our cameras anywhere. I can instantly cut from the good guy point of view to the bad guy point of view to God's point of view. There's no limits. I can't shoot off the edge of the set because there is no set. It's 360 degrees. If we stick an explosion to a scene, throw a couple lights in there, it lights up the side of the ship as it blows up. It casts the correct shadows. It's infinitely better.
One of the reasons people think CGI looks phony is usually what's happened is someone has ignored some of the rules or never learned the rules of compositing, and that means not only does the color and contrast and balance have to match, but it also has to look like it was shot on film.
Glenn Campbell kuvailee kohtauksen luomista sarjaan Space Above and Beyond.
The computer is always going to be incredibly clean. So what you need is something to dirty it up. You need the ability to add film grain. You need the ability to add blur. All the things, all the real-world phenomenon that would occur, because ultimately what you're trying to do is sell an illusion. The Hammerhead is the SA-43 attack jet of choice of the good guys on our show Space Above and Beyond. And in this particular episode, we basically budgeted 6 shots originally. Spaceships are landing. They want close-up shots of spaceships landing, and 3 shots of planes on the ground getting nuked. I had this idea of a Hammerhead tumbling down a runway between a bunch of guys running, trying to get away from it. And the producer said, you know, there's not that much money in the kitty, we're gonna have to shave off a few shots, so certain shots got chopped out. They said, look, it's the same budget. It doesn't cost you any more to have a bunch of people standing there while a spaceship lands than to have those same people turn and run and have the spaceship tumble behind them. Essentially, it's the same shot. And I described this shot to him, and he went, cool, let's do that one. So we had this empty plate of people running through the shot. Behind them, I needed to have the Hammerhead tumble on the runway, but it also had to go behind all the junk that was set on the runway. So what I needed was something to protect this area of film. So what we had to do was make a mat. And a mat is simply something that allows you to protect an object so that something can go behind it. It's an artificial layer. So that's what this is. This is a little outline that I've traced and filled in of every shape that I want the plane to go behind. The hammerhead will be in front of those hills, but behind this junk. What I'm going to do in the computer is I'm going to create a sandwich of a CGI plane and flame elements. What I've done here to help give the illusion of exploding is I've taken this plane, literally shrunk it down, and taken two of them and placed them in the same path that the plane is tumbling. So what will happen is as the plane falls over, this little miniature hammer will throw out shrapnel that will give the illusion that this plane is falling apart. As the plane slides over and explodes, a slightly larger hammer will throw out bigger pieces of shrapnel. The reason I have to do that is because if I take a piece of this wing, for example, and throw it up into the air, as the hammerhead slides from left to right, that piece of geometry will actually travel with it. Instead of going up, now independently loose of that and tumbling around, it'll still travel like it's attached on a string, which is bad. So I need separate shrapnel to give the illusion that parts of the plane have been flung off at different velocities, so that the illusion together would create the effect of non-ballistic motion from several different objects all at the same time. No shot exists in a vacuum. You have to worry about when you're designing a shot, what's the shot immediately preceding it, what's the shot that immediately follows it, because it all has to tie together. We knew there should be a lot of smoke billowing through here from the battle that's actually taking place off to the camera right. So we shot a separate smoke element and double exposed it and added it over the final composite to help, one, balance the shot together, because now the smoke goes over everything. It not only goes over the actors, it also goes over the plane, and also helps give the illusion they're all in the same room, living in the same environment. If you ask the question, what's computer animation, it is a technical art form that has absolutely no limitations and no boundaries.
Digital Muse-yhtiön animaattorit, jotka luovat Star Trekin tulevaisuusnäkymiä, käyttivät tietokonetta aikakoneena Titanicin tuomiseksi CBS:n minisarjaan.
The interesting thing about working on something that everybody's seen is you have to be more historically accurate, because everybody's seen pictures of the Titanic. They think they know what the Titanic looks like, so you have to give them that.
Our job was to photorealistically recreate the Titanic, the people on the Titanic, the water around the Titanic, the clouds above the Titanic, the smoke coming out of the stacks, and the waves it made as it sank.
We had to go in and recreate New York in the early part of the century. We took some early photographs and built a lot of CG to help correspond to what it should look like.
One of the problems that we had, for accuracy's sake, was that the Titanic was brand new. This was its maiden voyage. And one of the things that you do to make a model appear more realistic is you dirty down the model. We had to walk a fine line between historical accuracy and photorealism, because when you put the ship totally clean in the environment, it looks fake, even though that's probably the way it really looked. You don't expect it to look that way. It's very hard to recreate natural, dynamic objects like ocean water. And people know what it's supposed to look like because they see it all the time. To recreate a dynamic system like an ocean water, you basically have to build somewhat of a mathematical model that recreates how it changes over time, how it sparkles differently in different lighting situations, and how the colors tend to ebb and flow. So we were able to try something, go look at the real ocean, say, no, that's not quite right, come back, make a few more changes, and gradually fine-tune it into something that when someone looked at it, they had no idea they were looking at something created in a computer. If your image is not photorealistic and believable, the story will suffer.
We try to carry the grand film look through all the shots we do whenever we can. On Titanic, we have very grandiose moves. They're sweeping, epic kind of moves. There's no longer this compromise that we have to do in achieving a look in television, which was always very different from the film look. The system is a time machine. It makes it easier now for producers and for storytellers to tell their stories based on any time period. You can do future stuff, you can do past stuff, you can do present stuff, and CG can help in all of that. Computer illusions are a new type of reality. The use of computers today for things we do are slowly blurring the line between what's real and what's computer generated. And that's the fun thing for me, because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're not going to be able to tell anymore.
Herätettiinpä henkiin ajan sumuihin kadonneita maailmoita tai luotiinpa huikeita visioita avaruuden sivilisaatioista, laadukkaan tietokoneanimaation saatavuus on luonut suuren kysynnän taitavista tietokoneanimaattoreista. Alan yritykset panostavat uusien lahjakkuuksien etsintään ja koulutukseen.
We recruit from all over the world because there's such a shortage of talent. There's a lot of people who want to be in the industry, but there's a shortage of talent.
I didn't actually plan on getting into this business. I started off with an undergrad in computer science, and soon after, when I was getting ready to graduate, I messed around with, just a simple paint program.
CG came to me 87, 88. It was these things from Pixar, John Lasseter did. So I think everybody was kind of influenced by that. When I saw that first in Germany, like at that time, I thought, okay, I really want to do something like that.
I don't know what the percentage is, but there's a large number of people that we get fresh out of school.
There are a lot of places that are teaching. UCLA Extension has this lab which teaches a variety of programs. Art Center, Silicon Graphics, a lot of the computer software companies have set up schools.
We've got a lot of great people straight out of art schools, and so what we've done here is in a way patterned after the Disney studio back around the time of Snow White. He formed classes at Chouinard Art Institute with Don Graham. Well, we have formed Pixar University, and we continue to teach people how to use our system, but also fundamentals, and keep pushing them as animators. It's continuing education for all of us who are still working here. Because one of the things to keep this art form growing is we can't stand still, we can't rest on the laurels.
Up until the last couple of years, you really had to be a very computer-savvy individual first before you could start using the software. The equipment has matured, the software has matured, and it's becoming more and more possible for artists to come in and apply their skills without having to become technicians.
The challenging thing, which I enjoy now, is to do pantomime animation. The one challenge with a design like this, because they don't really have any facial expressions, they don't have a mouth, they just have kind of these little eyeballs. You really use, the whole body movement to really tell what, the character is thinking.
The tools that I recommend my students have above and beyond all else, and of course in addition to the computer, are a pencil, a sketchbook, and a full-length mirror. It is extremely important if you're going to bring a character to life, if it's going to have any believability, that in some way that you act the character out.
That was my first animation. I had never really animated or learned or even looked at a book on animation. It was out of just, it just kind of came out naturally.
Realististen ja uskottavien hahmojen luominen on tietokoneanimaation viisasten kivi.
A spoiled, ungrateful child was given a great gift and destroyed it.
A computer character is very, very difficult.
George Lucasin Industrial Light and Magic-yhtiön animaattori Rob Coleman teki Sean Connerysta myyttisen pedon elokuvaan Viimeinen lohikäärme.
Creating a character that has the same personality on screen as a live actor and having them interact is a challenging task. The reason that is because the audience is very accustomed to watching actors act. And you have to get them over this willing suspension of disbelief, to get them to believe that this synthetic character that only exists inside our computers is as real as the actors. It has to do with how does it move, how does it breathe, how does it blink its eyes, how does it talk, just like we would critique an actor.
Hello.
Jurassic Park has 6.5 minutes of computer graphics. Dragonheart had 23 minutes of computer graphics. And a lot of it you're seeing side by side in broad daylight next to the actors for long takes because they're having dialogue back and forth.
We dragons love to sing when we're happy.
Well, you're not like a dragon at all.
Well, how many dragons do you know?
Sean Connery was recorded months before we got involved. So we had the whole soundtrack of Sean's performance, and that had been cut into the film. So we had a rough cut of the film with empty frames and the voiceover of Sean's dialogue.
We dragons love to sing when we're happy.
Well, you're not like a dragon at all.
Well, how many dragons do you know?
He has a very distinctive voice. The audience knows and recognizes that voice. So our next task was to look at old Bond films, look at Sean's old films, and take aspects of the on-screen personality and then have them as a valuable reference library.
Well, how many dragons do you know?
We never would have taken on Dragonheart 2 years ago because the tools just weren't there.
We basically developed new software to help with the facial animation and dealing with the lip sync types of issues.
Oh, thank you. We dragons love to sing when we're happy.
So we could take a lot of the skinning techniques that they developed in Jurassic Park and concentrate more on the animation.
Because if you start to study Sean or any other actor or actress, there's very distinctive things they do with their face, and he does amazing things with his eyebrows and with his mouth. He'll pull back on some sounds, and he'll push out on other sounds, and the way that that mouth plays is very distinctive of Sean Connery.
You should never listen to minstrels' fancies. A dragon would never hurt a soul unless they try to hurt him first.
It's Sean's voice, and he provided the voice, but I got to provide the action of the character. So that's what gets me going. I mean, I get to work with, or my characters get to work with, some of the great actors in Hollywood.
Maailmassa, jossa supertähtiä muutetaan myyttisiksi lohikäärmeiksi, ei ole kaukana aika, jolloin luodaan täysin uskottavia animaatiohahmoja. Elokuvassa The Arrival animaattorit puhalsivat hengen maan ulkoiseen uhkaan.
The Arrival was a fun project because it was the first time that we really were doing the star creature or character. And there's 3 different things that come into play there that really make that piece work. One is just the modeling and the building of the character. He's a really well-designed character. You know, there's interesting kind of heat flaps over his brain. The fact you can see through his neck, which says this isn't a guy in a rubber costume. And the fact that knees bend backwards also is kind of a clue it's not a normal guy. In that modeling is a whole bunch of just really fine kind of detail in the way the musculature move. All the proper muscle groups that would be there on an alien like that are moving appropriately. One of our character TDs, Dick Walsh, built this incredible system where you start with a skeleton, layer muscles on top of it that work properly as the skeleton moves, and then you layer skin on top of that, which overlays where all the muscle mass is. So it's not a matter of just, gee, the shoulder moves, but all the muscles that are associated with that move properly. The second step was putting that model in the hands of great animators who can do that double take, who can really make it look like a character who's performing rather than being performed.
There's several challenges that we wanted to conquer in this. There's facial animation as well as body animation. The difference in facial animation between a squint and a smile is so subtle that in computer animation, I don't think it's ever really been done well.
The third step is the lighting, but the lighting group is more than just putting the lights in the scene. They start with the textures on the body and the amount of work they put into getting those textures to be seamless across all the joints.
We started adding some blue, splotchy kind of quality to the shoulders and to the top of the head flaps.
And anywhere where the alien might have had a little bit of a suntan, we put some blue splotchiness, and it really broke up the surface and made it look much more organic and more real.
And then the final part is integrating it in, another part that the lighting team does, putting that character in the scene, making sure that the shadows are right, and that you have a density to the atmosphere. Things wash out through the atmosphere as they go farther away, that when bright spotlights shine down on them, the atmosphere plays differently in those bright spotlights than it does in the dark and the shadows. And then, yeah, motion blur and adding in film grain, because you're putting it over live action. So we render our characters and we add the right amount of film grain on them before we put them in. And all those little tricks work to really seam it in there. So it was, you know, an amazing group of disciplines that came together to really make that work right.
Tehosteohjaaja Scott Anderson loi huikean vision avaruussodasta Paul Verhoevenin elokuvaan Starship Troopers, universumin sotilaat.
There's a very nice balance between all the digital aspects and the traditional aspects of film production.
Tietokoneanimaatio on mullistanut erikoistehostejaksot. Elokuvan tekijät käyttävät tietokoneita mutkikkaiden tieteisihmeiden suunnittelussa ja toteuttamisessa.
The two worlds of digital special effects and traditional special effects have really started to blend. Anything that was going to be large up in front of camera, I almost automatically selected as a traditional model. We had an 18-foot model which we used for the extreme close-up. Every spaceship you see has multiple passes, which are passes of the motion control camera over them, which go into creating their final look on screen. We had anywhere from 200 to 300 elements in some of our biggest shots. Digital compositing allowed us to handle so many elements. We create this immense level of detail to the large ships. Smaller ships were very hard to get detail into, so we created many of the smaller ships in digital. Digital pre-production, using the computer to help us design shots, allowed us to design intricate movements and build a complexity of a sequence. We didn't think about one shot, we thought about the whole sequence. Every ship that burns creates light on ships around it, and every explosion has an effect on the environment. Paul Verhoeven, the director, set out to make essentially a science fiction war film and wanted the feeling of great naval battles.
Paul wanted them to move through space rather like a tanker at sea moves. Although we're in a weightless environment, it looks heavy and real. Didn't want that sort of Star Trek look where it goes and disappears off rapidly or banks rapidly. They move quite ponderously through space.
For the smaller ships, we actually went for the other approach. We used the paradigm of airplanes. It became our anchor. It becomes the visual anchor that the audience attaches to. We have this epic expanse of space, yet you are constantly sandwiched in the middle of the action. I call it epic claustrophobia. You're always crushed up from below by the planet and above by the ships. The digital tools allowed us to do that in a way that wasn't possible just a couple years ago.
Tietokoneiden laskentatehon kasvaessa ja animaattorien taidon kehittyessä tulevaisuudessa siintää viihde, jota on vaikea erottaa Star Trekin holokannesta, ympäristöstä, joka luodaan tosiajassa toiveiden mukaan ja jota kansoittavat ihmeelliset ja mahdottomat olennot, kuulujen näyttelijöiden virtuaalikloonit ja historialliset hahmot, kaikki toteuttamassa interaktiivista tarinaa, jossa katsoja osallistuu toimintaan.
The tools and the technicians have come to a point now we're really at a jumping off point.
I think the possibilities are endless.
There's nothing that you can imagine that can't be done with computer graphics if you have enough money and enough time.
Every year there's new developments in software, there's new things going on that just make the dream easier to realize.
And that's what's exciting, is to be here at this moment in time with these tools and with this kind of vision out front of us. It's going to be great.
Voimme aavistaa, mitä tulevaisuus tuo. Ainoa avoin kysymys on, milloin se tapahtuu. Olemme nähneet, että kehitys on ennakoitua nopeampaa. Uskomattomia fantasioita, entistä todentuntuisempia ja näyttävämpiä. Tietokoneilluusioiden maailma. Lähellä ja mielikuvituksemme tuolla puolella.